Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Bianca.
And welcome back to the Pre-Service PodSquad Podcast.
So today we have our special guest, Dr. Kim Pinckney, is joining us. She is the new NJEA Consortium Coordinator. So before we kind of jump into this, can you tell us a little bit about your role at NJEA first?
Yeah, so you already said that I'm one of the newest, so I started in July, so I'm very, very new. But I'm an associate director in the Professional Development and Instructional Issues Division. We do lots of things in that division, but my main role, the main hat that I wear, is coordinating the consortium. And that is basically a lot of work that we do with the consortium is the result of a grant that we have through NEA to provide resources, professional development, community engagement events, and lots of other things related to the mandated curricula that we have in the state of New Jersey. So it's a really great opportunity to make sure that we're providing our educators with the resources that they need and the training they need to be able to provide more inclusive curricula throughout the state of New Jersey.
And we are going to dive into those
Yes,
magic words right here, state-mandated curriculum. That's amazing, and congratulations on your new position.
Thank you.
It's really exciting. How did you get into this work, get into education? What does your educational journey look like?
Thanks for the question. So I come from a family of educators. My mom is an educator. She's a retired educator and a retired NJEA member. My dad was also a lifelong educator, and he's retired from Rowan University. And so education was really just a staple in our family. So it's like, what are you going to do? Of course, I'm going to be in the field of education, right? And also that extends to my extended family. So I have a bunch of cousins who were teachers, aunts, uncles, the whole nine yard. And so I think ever since I can remember thinking about when people would say, what do you want to be when you grew up? I knew it was going to be a teacher of some sort. I didn't know what kind or what until I was introduced to the Spanish language in junior high in 7th grade, and I fell in love the very first day. My teacher just started talking in Spanish, and I fell in love with the rhythm of what she was saying. Had no idea what she was saying, but just fell in love with that. And I thought, oh, well, this is the thing that I feel like I'm coming alive with this subject matter. So I knew that I wanted to be an educator. And so after high school, I went to college right across the river in Pennsylvania at Swarthmore, and that was my pursuit. I pursued Spanish language and literature and teacher certification. So that's what brought me to education.
And what made you choose New Jersey specifically? What brought you here?
Well, I was born and raised here. So I am a product of New Jersey public schools, yay, public education. And so this is home, and I, wanted to sort of give back to where I was sort of growing up. But also I felt a real need. Where I grew up is in South Jersey. And at the time, our school district was not that diverse. Our student body was very diverse, but I never had a teacher of color. I had one in junior high. We had some substitute teachers, but I really felt like, I knew inherently, I didn't have the words around it, but I knew inherently that representation matters. And so I knew that I wanted to give back in a space where I felt like I so needed to be seen. But yeah, it was also a home, so that helped.
It's kind of amazing because I think that's something that a lot of people experience across the nation, but across New Jersey too. And so I think there's been a big push now for recruitment and retention of minority educators, and it's incredibly important that we have teachers who represent our students.
Well, I think that that's one thing to pick up on too, is that I mentioned both of my parents are educators, and I think sometimes folks will say, oh, well, people of color just aren't applying, and that's one possible answer. And another possible answer is that maybe there just aren't enough opportunities, or that they are applying but not getting picked up, right? And so my parents are both educators, and they both applied in the district that I went to school and weren't sort of there. So it wasn't an issue of people not applying. I think that's just something that we've had to shift the culture around and our familiarity around. And school districts had to be brave enough to take on different types of teachers. So.
And when you were working as a Spanish teacher, did you noticing anything in the school building working with other teachers? Like, was it sort of only the foreign language department that was more diverse, or did you notice any of those?
So actually, I was the only, so where I was teaching, I was very, very fortunate to teach in Morristown, and shout out to William Allen Middle School. They actually had an incredibly diverse staff. So I was sort of, welcomed and felt like I saw other people amongst the staff within the foreign. And the other thing is that it's the type of place where people would go and teach and they stayed. It was such a great community. So in the foreign language department, I think I was the only person of color, but everyone had been there for so many years. So it was a really, really great experience in that when you're a new educator, I felt like I had so many people that I could tap into. I went and observed all these classes with my fellow educators, and it was just a really, really great welcoming environment. But that particular district, they really had, before it was cool, I feel like they had a real mission around inclusive hiring practices and making sure that the staff also represented their student body. So it was a really great situation.
So and everything to look like every school.
In your own experience teaching and going through your own schooling experience, what do you think might be the effects on a student who can't really see themselves in their teachers?
Good question. And I think that's the thing that people don't often think about. It's sort of like the absence of, and then what does that mean, right? So for me personally, it was really a sense of like, you don't necessarily know what's possible sometimes unless you see it, right? And so for some people, for some students, especially in the state of New Jersey, like school can be a safe haven if maybe your home environment isn't as safe. It could be a place where people are finding themselves through clubs and activities and all of those things, right? You're really forming a lot of your identity in school. We spend a lot of hours in school. And so the people that you're surrounded by really influence you in such a really big way. And when you don't see yourself reflected, I think it just begs a question. It begs a lot of questions. And one of those is, what are my possibilities, right? Do I have to sort of look like this to achieve something? Like, what are we saying, right? And I think that that's one of the big things. It's that representation also helps to create a shared understanding of what is possible. And when you don't see that, it doesn't always encourage the possibilities, right? And I think one of the best things we can do in our schools is to help students, regardless of their background, regardless of their socioeconomic status, but to really help them see what the possibilities are for themselves.
We had an episode a few episodes ago with Chris Canilla, who is the chair of SOGI, and he was, speaking about a similar thing. And I think a big, theme that's kind of connecting both episodes here is visibility.
Right.
And even if, let's say, there is no representation, it's also, what hidden message does that send if we're not explicitly saying this is our expectations or these are societal norms, what hidden message do we not see when we don't have
exactly intended or unintended, right? What are those hidden messages, and what are sometimes it, especially when it's not spoken, I think people can internalize things, right? Even if it's unintended, right? The internalization is, only a certain type of people may be a teacher, or only a certain type of person may be a good teacher, right? But the reality is everyone has their own gifts, and everyone should have a space at the table. And so I think that's something that we really need to do a better job of making sure that our students know.
So let's take this one step further.
Okay.
We talked about, not having a diverse range of teachers, that there are schools that are fortunate to have a diverse population, but maybe there's other schools around the state that do not have that privilege. So how are students impacted when there's no representation in what they're learning, and not only in what they see in the school environment, but also in the materials that they're seeing and viewing?
So many thoughts just sort of came up to the surface. So one, I've already stated, I fell in love with the Spanish language. And I remember our textbook, I think, I'll be dating myself, but it was the 90s, early 90s, when I was in middle school. And our textbook even then was sort of outdated, but all of the people all of the images in our textbook sort of represented one sort of physical appearance, I would say, right? And so I thought, oh, people that speak Spanish look like this because this is what my textbook is showing me. This is what my Spanish teacher looks like. And it wasn't until college that I realized, oh, there are other people, there are Black people in Spanish-speaking countries. And then it like all of these connections that would have made, I mean, I had already fallen in love with how the language sounds, right? But then it opened up this world of possibilities for me to seek deeper connections on a more personal and interpersonal level that I didn't realize that I had. And so it just gave me a spark to even want to dive further. And so that's just one example of one subject area, right? And then if you think about sort of history in those classes, I love history now as an adult. I did not enjoy it at all in my schooling. And there's a reason for that, right? Like, because in my schooling, there was a chapter on slavery, and there was a lot of discomfort around how to handle that. I could tell that my teachers weren't as comfortable handling the subject matter. I also remember feeling a certain type of way because it set it up like my people's history started with enslavement, and they didn't even acknowledge that it was enslavement. It was just you were slaves. And so that was very difficult. It didn't leave me with a good feeling. I certainly felt like, and you couldn't, you're, I don't know, in fourth grade, you're not raising your hand being like, I don't really feel good about this lesson. It was just more of like this internal thing that you had to deal with and process on your own, right? And so now we know that there are so many different ways to approach that content, right? And to really acknowledge what was really going on in terms of enslavement versus slaves, and just that language difference that we're now sensitive to makes such a big difference, right? And I also think that now, especially through works like what we're trying to do with the consortium, is helping to give people and teachers and educators the resources and language around how to talk about these things, how to address these topics that are difficult. Like it's not going to become not difficult. It's like a touchy subject. It just is what it is, right? But we still have to address these things, because when we don't, hidden messages, unintended messages are what gets absorbed. And I think we have to be very explicit and intentional about the messages that we're giving ourselves and our learners. So there's a lot to be done in that space. And I've so many examples of that, but that's not fair.
That's a really strong point. I mean, I'm a history major, so a lot of that stuff is what I'm studying now. And the way that we present history to students definitely impacts the way that they see their own identities. And like we were talking about before, if they're not represented in the curriculum, or if they do see their identities represented in the curriculum, but it's not represented as the most whole picture,
that's right,
it's difficult for them to see the most accurate version of their history. And that in itself is harmful. Right. So I guess the question that I have for you, obviously we're starting to talk about the work that the consortium is doing with this. What kind of mandates are in New Jersey that are sort of controlling or affecting the way that teachers are teaching this history?
Sure. So we have several. And what's really great and what's really forward-leaning about New Jersey is that we do have these mandates, right? The fact that we have to have mandates is a little telling, I think, about where we are in our culture and our society, but so thankful that we do. So one of them is the Amistad mandate, which basically says that school districts need to, in their courses where we're talking about American history and other things, and wherever appropriate in the curriculum, to include the contributions of African American peoples, but across entities. So we're not just talking about history, we're talking about math, we're talking about in the arts, like across the board, to include those contributions. And I love that it's not just teach African American history, right? It's about contributions of people. Because when we talk about representation, it's about like that, what can I contribute? Oh, I've seen that someone who may look like me or have a similar identity to me has contributed this to like our whole society. And that's a big difference than sort of facts on this date, da-da-da-da-da-da. So that's one of them. Another one is, so we have Holocaust and genocide studies. So not just talking about the Holocaust, but also the effects of genocide, right? And understanding what that is, how that contributes to all aspects of a society, and that from elementary on up. That's another mandate. We also have AAPI, so the contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the curriculum from elementary on up is a requirement, as well as LGBTQIA and persons with disabilities is another mandate. And the mandates are focused on not just histories, but contributions of these folks. And I think that really just gets at sort of representation in such a great way.
Mm-hmm. I have so many questions.
Go for it. Go for it.
I guess the first thing is that I'm so glad that you walked us through all of those different, mandates that are in place across the state, not just, we're not talking about one specific school district, like this is in New Jersey, but I feel like a lot of pre-service educators are unaware that this exists, that they have to, implement all of these in whatever discipline they're teaching. This is K-12, correct?
Yeah, it is K-12. I will say that the LGBTQIA plus and the persons with disabilities mandate specifically says middle school and high school, making sure that things are age appropriate and all of that, but all the others are K-12.
True. And then my next question is, I was wondering if you knew whether, or why I should say, disabilities and LGBTQ plus were paired together, sort of, because I saw they were in the same mandate.
They are in the same mandate. And so that mandate predates me, but I will say that I think, from what I understand, it was more sort of palatable and able to get past putting those two together. I think, and speaking about, like, we've talked about differences in different districts throughout the state. Some districts are more comfortable talking about LGBTQIA plus issues and contributions, and some are not. And I think combining it with persons with disabilities help to get folks on board, if you will.
Okay. So it's more so about passing that mandate to at least get it in. Okay. Who knows? Maybe that will evolve or become
maybe
different.
It will evolve. Yeah, and I think what I think is going to happen is I foresee other mandates in the future. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of other underrepresented identities, right, that are going to be emerging and become a part of the lexicon and become a part of, all of the, society and what we recognize. So I imagine that could evolve over time.
Yeah. I know a big thing that people are talking about in education right now is like, we have to teach this history, but then, which stories, which people do we prioritize, or do we include or do not include, or so that's, I know, a big thing that's going on in my head, because like you said before, like in history, like what students are learning also impacts their own perception of their identity. And so even in math, like I think just like in history, we're trying to move away from just teaching the dates. Like in math, it shouldn't just be about the numbers.
For sure.
Everything that you were talking about before is kind of like, this is all about the people, like the people and the contributions of people in history behind each of these disciplines.
Well, I love what you were saying just about what stories we're going to tell versus others, because there sometimes can be a prioritization of some voices over others, with both within and sort of across mandates, right? So I remember when I was growing up, we studied the Diary of Anne Frank. Like, it's one of those, quintessential pieces of literature that we read. And I was just talking with another scholar, a Holocaust and genocide studies scholar. There are so many other children's diaries from that time, right? And so the Diary of Anne Frank tells the story of what it's like to be sort of hiding in a very specific place. But what about those children who also had diaries that lost their parents and were sort of fleeing in different regions of the area? And their accounts are very different, So I don't know how it was that Anne Frank's diary became the one that we're going to uplift, but just the knowledge that there are other stories and other voices. And I think it's our job to continue to seek out those voices. It's sort of that. I also teach at Wayne State University in their doctoral program for instructional design. And the course that I'm teaching this semester is sort of a history of the field course, history, right? Mm-hmm. So I always caution my students to think about, yes, we're going to be hearing and we've accepted certain voices as quintessential and seminal voices in the space, but always be thinking about what voices you're not hearing. and asking why and approaching that with a critical lens, right? So I'm covering all of those sort of seminal and quintessential voices, but also adding in others and, or other examples and getting them to think about that. Like, why do we think that hasn't gotten as much attention as others? And so the work I don't think will ever be done. That question is always going to be an important question of that critical lens, like what voices am I hearing and what voices am I not hearing, and then seeking them out intentionally. So
there's always more to find.
There is always more to
I
find.
appreciated what you said before. You were talking about highlighting maybe groups that we haven't heard from as much in the past, who haven't been included in our representations of history, but also highlighting their contributions and finding the stories of others who have so far sort of been muted in these representations. I think one way that educators can do that is through oral testimonies. I did a project in the spring semester, and it was in collaboration with the Yale Fortunoff Archive. And so we were transcribing oral testimonies from Holocaust survivors.
Amazing.
So those stories and, watching their testimonies, if we didn't dig into the archive like that, we wouldn't have those types of narratives. We wouldn't hear about their stories. They would have been sort of just lost in the archive, and our work was trying to sort of bring their stories to light. But you're right, the main narratives are oftentimes Anne Frank's diary, but there's so much more to the story than just that. So I think to try to work towards fulfilling some of these mandates, educators can focus on, finding those voices that we really haven't heard from. And a lot of that can come from oral testimonies. And you can do archival work to find those stories. Otherwise, they might just sort of be lost.
Well, I love that you brought that up. First of all, I'm sure that you got so much out of that experience. It sounds like it was phenomenal.
And she told the presentation to us.
Well, there you go. Fantastic. I would love to see it, actually, so we can talk about consortium stuff. But I think one of the things that's so rich in, sort of histories when it comes to contributions is oral histories and storytelling. It doesn't always get, the same clout as maybe someone who is published in an established journal and all of those things. But, much of these underrepresented populations that these mandates are really serving to sort of bring to the forefront, there's such a rich history of storytelling. And the more that we can dive into these archives, the more that we can just talk to our own elders, whether it be, in the LGBTQIA space or African, any of those spaces, but to talk to them and get their stories. It's just such a rich experience, and we have so much to learn. So I love that you got to do that.
And maybe a project that educators can consider for their students is collecting oral testimonies, right? To maybe from grandparents, other relatives, people who they know who sort of lived through some of these, large historic events, or just to hear the average everyday life of whoever it may be. So that could be a project in itself, and that's sort of participating in like their own archival type of work.
Absolutely. I love that idea. I'm going to steal it. So thank you.
Let's also talk about like what the consortium is trying to do to sort of create, because I know you said, you're new in this position and you're trying to collect.
I'm still getting up to speed.
Right.
Yeah, but it's an ambitious effort. So there's a lot going on in terms of what we're hoping to achieve and what we will achieve. So one of the pieces is to establish a repository of resources that would be available to our members at NJEA that would have sample curricula, instructional plan, like lesson plans with primary sources if we can get them, that really speak to these sort of lived experiences and these contributions across the mandates. But not just looking at the mandates in silos. We really want to focus on intersectionality. And this is a piece that I kind of alluded to in my I fell in love with the Spanish language story. And then I sought out like how I related to that, right? I don't know myself without my intersectional experiences. And there's no such thing as history without it being intersectional, right? And I think that that's one of the pieces that maybe it's taken us such a long time to get to acknowledging other voices, is recognizing our shared humanity and sort of shared experiences, like those, maybe the situation, like I'm not related to Anne Frank, for example, but this notion of maybe having, being fearful based on your own identity, being fearful, like those types of things, we can relate to that as humans, right? So I really love that the consortium is attempting to make sure that we're addressing this from an intersectional purpose. Okay, so repository of resources of instructional materials is a big piece. Another piece is providing professional development experiences. So for educators who may be, hey, I went to school to be a Spanish teacher, I don't know anything about these mandates or not sure how to incorporate that into my classes, professional development experiences where we can walk you through some of these things, where we can also provide immersive field trips to different places, museums. There's a bunch of sort of different sites in New Jersey that were part of the Underground Railroad that we can bring people to. So immersive field trip experiences where they can experience different aspects that address these mandates and then have some time to reflect on that and come up with their own lesson plans. So that's a piece of it. And one of the things that we do too is that we recruit design team ambassadors. And so we have our first cohort was brought in, I think, around in 2022. But each year we're allowed to recruit up to 15 people to serve as design team ambassadors that will help develop the professional development opportunities and the design pieces for the curriculum and that repository of resources that we're trying to accomplish. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But the other piece is community engagement events. So one of the things that's really important with education is that it's not just teacher-student relationships, but also the community, right? And making sure that we're gaining buy-in with and amongst the community, making sure that they know about these mandates, and we can kind of demystify some of this content where it needs to be demystified and provide opportunities for them to sort of interact with the content. So it had started out where we were going to plan our own community engagement events, but that became a little too overwhelming. So what we do is we tap into existing community engagement events, and we will typically have a booth, help contribute to that event, give away multicultural books, talk to people about the consortium so that they know that this is an effort in the state of New Jersey. So those are the main components of the consortium.
And is there any way pre-service members could be involved in the consortium?
I love that you asked that question. So the first go-around, the first cohort, they had focused on social studies teachers only or history teachers only, and they had to be members. But now, meaning members in the classroom. So now, in a couple of weeks, we'll be opening up the second cohort application, and I'm very, very proud to announce that pre-service members, yes, you, so pre-service members are able to apply as well as retired members. So I'm super excited, and just thinking about when we're talking about collecting oral histories and learning from it's cross-generational, I love it. So we'll be able to do that. So that application will be coming out in a couple of weeks, and it will be open through, I think, 2 weeks after the convention, because we want to be able to advertise and, get a last-ditch effort for people that want to apply at convention. And I'm happy to talk about what the application will entail if you'd like.
Yeah. Is it also a year-long commitment, or?
Good question. So it's a minimum of a year-long commitment with potential to keep going throughout the life of the grant, basically until we run out of our funding for the grant. The grant was intended to be 3 years long, but we do have some carryover funds and things like that. So at least it's a minimum of a year. For the application, there's a bunch of, questions around familiarity, obviously, with the mandates that I just talked about, or interest in those mandates. And then some behavior-based questions around how you interact with other people, because this is not just, you're not working by yourself. You have to work with a team of people. And like I just mentioned, we are opening this up to pre-service members, our members who are in the classroom, as well as retired members. So this is an intersectional, we're designing intersectional curricula, and we're also going to be an intersectional team. And then there will be a performance task sample that folks have to design in the application with a couple of other prompts. So yes, it will be very interesting and important, and I'm excited to offer that to you guys.
That's amazing. So where can we find the application once it's out?
Sure. Once it's out, it will be on our consortium website. So on NJEA's main website, we have a consortium page, and the application will be there. But folks who are interested in the meantime, you can email us at consortium@njea.org. That's consortium@njea.org. And we can sort of store your name and email address so that you can get it sort of hot off the presses. We'll email it to you first.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like an amazing opportunity.
Yes.
So
for all the NJEA pre-service members out there listening to this conversation, I hope you heard Kim very loudly. Definitely apply. This is an amazing opportunity beyond building beyond being just a resume builder. Absolutely. I think this is a great opportunity to engage with other teachers, retired or active, and just work with design team, as a design team ambassador, work with a team, an intersectional team.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's that part of being a part of the change that you want to see, right? So if you're passionate about making sure that underrepresented voices are brought to the forefront, if you're passionate about social justice and intersectionality, if you're passionate about making sure that classrooms and educators are equipped with content and instructional material that will help achieve those ends, this is the perfect opportunity to apply for. And I'll also say there are perks associated in that when we talk about these professional development opportunities, we provide them to our DTAs as well, right? There's training that we help to give people. If you're not familiar with understanding by design, that's the main sort of format that we use for performance tasks. So we provide that training. When we talk about those immersive field trips, you get to go on those, right? So it's a really, really great opportunity for your own learning, as well as also contributing and giving back to the state of New Jersey. So
it's like a beautiful candy wrapper kind of way of putting it. It doesn't seem like there's something better. This is the most ideal.
I don't think so, but yeah.
Kim, thank you. Thank you for talking to us today. Thank you for telling us about this opportunity. I hope that other pre-service members will apply. I don't know about you, Chelsea, but I'm definitely going to look into that.
I'm excited. Please do.
Please
do. Yeah.
Thank you for your insights. We really appreciated hearing about it.
Thank you. Yeah. And I promise to come back, with some of our other design team ambassadors and so that we can roll out some of the curriculum materials that we've been working on and share them with all of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. And for our Pod Squad, this Pod Squad is going to be continuing as a series, so be sure to look out for more episodes related to state mandated curriculum and what NJEA with the consortium is doing and the work that they're putting out. So thank you again.
You're so welcome.
And
thank you.
We will talk to you again soon, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a happy Thursday.